Okay, so let's start. Last class, I asked you to do a in-class exercise. So for this in-class exercise, main purpose is to use aggregation functions in the necessary query, in the subquery, so we can compare what happened in the main query for the employee. Okay, let me write this down so we know the same logic here. So we want to retrieve those employee, and I want to check the employee information to see how many daughters for the employee. Another condition is what is the salary of the employee? So the salary part, and also how many daughters. So two conditions. And this part, the dependent part, is done by subquery, and we want to use aggregation functions in the subquery. So let's see how to do this. First of all, let me do the outer query here. Okay, and I need the employee's SSN, employee's first name, employee's last name. Okay, and I also want to check one condition for the employee is the salary, right? So we have the salary less than this. So you basically we have two conditions, one and another one. You can do either one first. So let me do the salary one first. So this one need to be less than that. And then let's see the other condition, how many daughters? This one we need to go to the dependent table, do a count in the select statement. Okay, it is very important, a very common problem. In the past, students just use employee join with the dependent table and do a count here. It will not work. Okay, so in this case, we need a subquery here. I'm going to show you another approach today. For so far, this is the only way you know how to do. And we need to use a subquery to do the count. So the aggregation function cannot directly in the where. In this case, we can put in the where just because this is a subquery and the count is actually in the select statement. Okay, so we select the dependent here, and the condition is we need to make sure the employee's SSN equal to dependence ESSN, and I need to make dependent relationship, right? So this is one attribute there. It's equal to daughter. Okay, and I need to do this whole thing, right? So, and I need to have count here. So I want to count how many daughter, and this is a whole query. Let me get rid of this so I have a little bit more space. Okay, so this subquery whole thing, eventually we're going to return to more than 3. Okay, so remember that this one asks you daughters. So for the dependent, the relationship here indicate which one is the daughter, because the dependent can have, like, for example, wife is also can be female, and you need to use the relationship one. Okay, so we have this one. Let me see, did I make any mistake? No. Okay, so that's the way to handle this. So you can see, one thing is you know how to use subquery, and also you can see how to use a condition, and another condition is actually using subquery. So they can be all in the where clause. Okay, so that's for this query, and hopefully from this query you understand how to do subqueries, right, by yourself. And we'll see this one. So a type of problem that is, not only we can know we have this type of employee or not, do we have a daughter or not, but we also know how many. However, there's one thing, if we ask, this query cannot be done. That is, I know this query going to return me SSN first name, last name, right? We have to satisfy whoever satisfy the condition. But I want to know how many daughters the employee has. For example, it's more than 3. I know it's more than 3, but it's 4, 5. How many? This particular query cannot answer that type of question. So you see what I mean? You'll be able to filter out the things that, we need more than 3, we can, but how many eventually you produce for each of them, we don't know. So this is the one we're going to introduce. We're going to introduce another clause, that's the group by, and we can use group by to solve similar problem, but we also can know how many eventually. All right, so that's good. Okay, so let's see the group by. This is actually very important because we think problem, solve problem differently from anything we talked before. Also, this is the one people easily lose point, because whenever you see a problem, when you just do, okay, put a count in the where clause greater than 3, that's it. And you should think about, when we want to see each group, like how many daughters for each employee, how can we do that, right? So this is the one to help you to do. All right, so let's see how this one, the logic wise, what is group by? In the query we discussed in the past, we have a whole result, right? One table result. And say, for example, if I go back to any of them, like none of them is a good example. So actually, let me write down something. Okay, so if I do select star from employee, for example, right? So I'm going to get all the employees here. And I'm not, so I can also join employee for dependent, for example, I have like a whole table here. But what happened, I want to divide my result into different subgroup. Like this is one subgroup, this is another subgroup, and this is another subgroup. And I want to do certain aggregation functions within the group. Like I count how many tuples in my group, how many tuples in this subgroup. So if we want to do this, we are going to use the group by clause. So one thing, for example, if so think about the classroom situation, I can ask students to move around, and they say, all the freshmen in this corner, and all the sophomore in this corner, all the junior in this corner, and all the senior in this corner. And eventually I be able to divide my students in my classroom into 4 different subgroup, right? So I can do 4 subgroup. And the reason which subgroup to go, right? So like my classroom, I'm going to do 4 different groups. And the reason which group to go is because you are either freshman or sophomore or whatever, so you go to the right position correspondingly. Once I divided the student into different group, I can ask student to I can do certain aggregation function. For example, I want to count in my class how many freshmen, maybe 4, and this is maybe 3, and this is maybe 15, this is maybe 10, things like that. So I be able to do certain way to do calculation or aggregation. And so you'll see the way I do, I count how many freshmen. This is not on the whole class, right? So my whole class more like the result we produced in the past is one table. Now I further divided my table into result into subgroup. So this 4 is counting only on freshmen, and this 3 is only on sophomore, things like that. Okay, so that's basically the concept. So if we go back to the previous question, right? So we want to count how many daughters, right? And the counting is meaningless unless we know which employee we are talking about, right? So if we know the first employee, I want to count how many daughters in the result. So this is a similar situation here. So what we do here is we have something called group by, okay? And so for group by, we have the group by clause, and after that, we are going to specify grouping attribute or attributes. So this can be one attribute, like for example, I have here to say what is your status, freshman or junior, right? So that's grouping attribute. We can also have grouping attributes. For example, I can further say, you know, in this part, I need a freshman and also female. And then another group, I need a freshman, also male, right? So I can do the combination of 2 attributes together as the grouping attributes. Okay, so only when a person, both freshman and the female, they will sit in this group, this subgroup. If they are a freshman and a male, then there will be the second group, right? Second subgroup. So the reason we know which group to go is because any element, any tuples having they will have the same value for the grouping attribute of attributes. Okay, and then our aggregation function apply to each subgroup independently. So when we count how many freshmen female, I count how many, say 2 here, and this is independently from counting sophomore female, for example. They are independent. It's not on the whole thing. Okay, and the one most important is SQL has the group by clause. In this clause, for when you have grouping attributes, like for example, I have 2 attributes, or even just like status, 1 attribute, must also appear in the select clause. So this is a rule in SQL standard. Although you know, in different database vendors product, they have like a relative loose or more strict, actually, sorry, I should say some of them has exactly same rule as SQL standard. Some of them has more loose rule than SQL standard. But no matter they are loose or not, I strongly suggest you just follow the SQL standard. To me, that's the only thing meaningful. Even the vendor's product, you know, whatever the query processor you use, didn't enforce that much, but this is actually the only thing makes sense to use when you use group by. And I'm going to show you in a minute why this one makes sense, why I ask you everyone to follow this. And also a good thing to follow this is when you move your code to another DBMS system, you don't have to change your code. It's just because, you know, one system actually didn't give you a strict rule on this and you get this done and working, but you move to another system, totally doesn't work. It just because doesn't follow the SQL standard. Okay, so now let's see how to do this in example. Okay, so so when we use group by, we can solve very similar problem without using subqueries. Okay? It doesn't mean group by cannot combine with subquery. It just means the same problem when you use group by, you do not need to use subquery anymore. Okay. Of course, a more complicated query, you can use both. Okay, so let's see this one. Okay, so for this one, for each department, this is something actually a sign or something like when you read it, like in an exam, you say, oh, this is maybe something I want to use group Y. Okay, a trick here. So for each department, I want to get department number. Okay, so that's easy. And number of employee in the department. You see this number of employee in the department is referencing to each department. So this is not about the totally how many employee. This one is about in each department how many, right? Okay, so that's a good things to use group by and their average salary. So you see, we are going to check for each department what are the separate aggregation function can be applied to get a result. So let's see this. So first of all, if I do select star from employee, okay, just simply select star from employee, what I can get is this whole employee table, right? Okay, and then let's do this. Let's do a group by DNO. Okay, so once we do that, we are going to do something very similar to what I said in a classroom. I'm going to move my students around. So now every student is an employee table, employee records, employee tuple in the employee table here. So I'm going to move the employee tuples around in here. So according to group by, this is basically tell me what are the criteria to move those employee tuples around. So the department number, say for example, I have department number 1 and department number 3, department number 10, for example, like that. So all the employee tuples with this DNO equal to 1 going to go to here. So if we draw things here, then that will be something like department number 1, and they have other attributes, department number 1, other attributes, department number 1, other attributes. And of course, the DNO is the very last element, right, in your employee table. So here we can think about maybe the tuples preserve the same structure, just the columns to be easily to see what's going on is actually this first, we move the DNO column to the beginning column, so we can easily put the rest of things in to do calculation. And so the next thing is for number 3, similar, any tuples with number 3 here and number 10 also here. So that's my tuples here. And you can see, if you think about human beings, right, probably easier if we were in a classroom, then easier you see people can moving around and they are in one subgroup, they are in another subgroup. So this group by simply tell the query processor, I'm going to divide them according to these attributes into different subgroup. So now in this particular example, I have 3 subgroups, right? 3 subgroups. And for each subgroup, the reason they are in one subgroup because the DNO value is the same. So that's what I mentioned, they have the same value here. Okay, and now I'm going to do 2 aggregation functions. One is count. So this count is simply count how many, and let me see, my output will be looks like this, right? So I'm going to have a DNO in my output, and I go 1, 3, 10. That's my grouping attribute. Then depends on what is the aggregation function. So this is a count. I count star. So what is the column name of this? So I mentioned this in the previous class. It depends on the DBMS you use. Some of them just put this one as a column name, and some of them they just put empty, no name for the column. Like a DNO, you see a column name, but this one you don't see anything. Okay, but anyway, when we do a count, then simply 1, 2, 3. This one has a 3 employee. And 1, 2, 3, also 3, and this 10 has 1. Okay, so that's, you see, I apply this to each subgroup 1 by 1 independently. And then we do average salary. Similar, I add all the salary of them and divide it by 3. So I get a value, and value here. That's also calculated independently. within each group, you do calculation independent of other subgroup. Okay, and now let's see, when we produce this, how many result we have. So this is the final output, right? So how many we have, it depends on how many distinct value you have for the group by. So this DNO say I have 3 distinct value, 1, 3, 10, then I'm going to have 3 tuples in my output. And in another case, maybe there's more tuples, more department, maybe 10 department, then you have 10 records in the final output. So now if we go back to this, if we take a look about, this particular things I emphasize here, so when we have something in a group by, they must also appear in the select. And so when we have group by, the rule is if you put something here, then definitely this one need to be shown in the select. And in the select, we can do more than that. But what is more than that is aggregation function. So in the select, only 2 things can be done. One is the attribute shown in the group by, the other is the aggregation function, nothing more, nothing less. So it is okay, you only have 1 aggregation function, that's okay. Or you don't even need to have aggregation function. It depends on what the query asks. Or you can have 3 aggregation function, they all fine, but you cannot have some other attributes in the select. So according to SQL standard, and many DBMS actually enforce that. MySQL actually lose on this. So you put other attributes, they will take it. To me, it doesn't make sense. And if you create a certain scenario, you will see actually give you something really misleading. And so I, here again ask you to follow the standard. Okay, so let's see why we have to have this one exactly the same, right? So if you see the output here, say this one has just content average, right? So of course that's wrong, but you also can see without this column, this one means nothing, because you have 3, you want to know the 3 is which department's number, right? The number of employees in which department. I have no idea this belongs to which one. So you have to have a DNO here to tell you this is department number 1, this is department number 3. This one tell you the group that each of the number belongs to, the meaning of them, right? The meaning of, I mean, it's not the meaning, it's just, you have to know, give you average salary, which department has this average salary. So that's why this is necessary here. And anything put in a group by, so you can have more than 1, right? Remember, I'll give you that example. You can have this, you can have another one, you can even have 3, whichever number, you use comma to separate them. And once you have that, that's basically should be, so when you put this one like A, B, C, then that should be the way to identify each group. I still remember I have this question, so I use both the freshman and female together, right, to identify the group. So same thing here, when you have this is the one to tell you when I do this type of criteria to separate into subgroup, what are the ABC there. So that's basically how to use group by. Okay, so this is, I know it's a little bit difficult for many students because we actually do further things on dividing into subgroup, but this is actually very useful features in SQL. Okay, so that's for this. And whenever we have this, is commonly people, try to say, okay, can we just do where clause, things like that? And the answer is yes, if you can do it correctly. So basically, let me quickly move on to this and we'll come back to that. I know we need more than that. So basically, you see, when you use group by, you still can use select from, you can use where, actually you have to use select from, and you can have where, you can have order by. They can be, all of them can be there to answer a question. So when you use group by, like my example doesn't have where, but you can have where. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so now let's see one draw, a little bit better than what I did. Actually, the same example. So this is the employee. This is the employee table, and we can see when we do different department, they are going to move around, right? This is actually moving around already. So that's number 5. They're going to produce the result like this. So it actually doesn't matter if you group by something in the middle of the column or not, because the whole tuple actually moving around, and you just produce the result correspondingly. Okay, so that's for the group by. And for group by, in many cases, we are going to combine group by with something called having. Okay, so group by, for example, this one can tell us how many employee and the salary. But if I ask a question further, that is, I don't want to see all the result. I only want to see the department which has more than 2 employees, right? So if they have only 1 or 2, I don't want it. Only when they more than 2, I want to see the output. So this is actually a condition, right? So most of people think, oh, it's condition, I should put it in the where clause. And in this case, let's think about it, okay? So I need to introduce something called having. And I know I have a question there like a second ago. Let's see how to handle that. Is it in the where or in having? So what is having? This is the one we want to get the result, the function like, the count or, sum or, average salary or those things. I only want them satisfy certain condition. So when do we use having? This is the one applied to subgroup. Okay, so remember, one critical thing here is no matter group by or having, they are applied to subgroup. So if you want to operate something on subgroup, you're going to use the group by and having. This is a filter, but this is a filter directly working on the subgroup. Okay, and they are a condition on subgroup. They are not on individual tuples. So that's actually the big difference in the where clause, right? So when we say where we think about some attribute employee where last name, where is it? Where last name equal to Smith, for example, right? So this is on individual tuple. Remember, if you go back to very first lecture on SQL query, you will see this is actually checking each tuple. Do we have Smith as last name or not? So that's where clause on individuals. Okay, but for having, this is on subgroup result. Also, where clause is executed before the having. So you can think about select from where. Okay, so when you have this is pretty much the select part need to be, pretty much like a star. It doesn't have the details yet, but this one going to give you a big table. And then the group by divided the result into different group, and the having clause go to each subgroup and to do the certain filter, say, oh, this one satisfy, no, this one satisfy, yes, no. So that's the condition, yes, no. The filter is based on subgroup. So that's the critical point. Very common mistake in the past. When people see a filter, okay, whenever I have a condition, they directly just put in the where clause, no matter what. That is wrong. You need to see this filter on what? On tuple individually or on a group. Okay. Another thing you need to remember is when you have having, you must have group by. Okay, we can have group by without having, like this example, right? We have group by, we don't have having just because in our question, there's nothing asked about to do filter on the subgroup, so no having, fine. But if you have a having, so if you in the exam, if you answer something have a having, then immediately check the clause above it should be group by. Otherwise, what you did is wrong. Remember, this is applied to subgroup. Group by allow us to divide it into subgroup. If you don't even have subgroup, how can you apply the condition? Okay, I hope this makes sense. So let's see this example. And you will see this is actually quite similar to what we did in the previous one. And the only difference is we have more than 2 employees. So we do further restriction on which department, okay? For each department, but not every single one, just when they have more than 2 employees. Let's see how to answer this. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to select from the employee table. And when we do this, it allows us to get all the employees, right? Okay, and when I do group by, and this is according to what they ask you to group by. So for each department, I'm going to group by DNO here. And then when we do a select, remember they need to be consistent. I'm going to do that. So this one tell me, okay, I'm going to cut this into a different subgroup. And according to DNO, I know which group to go. Okay, and then they want to see what is the department number, what is the department number, already have it, number of employees in the department and the average salary. So now I need to know how many by count, right? So that's what we did. And this count is not count the whole thing, it's based on group because we have the group by here. And then I'll calculate the average salary. So up to here, this is exactly the same as our previous one, right? But further, how can handle more than 2? Remember, this is on each group. I want to see how many, more than 2 or not, more than 2 or not, more than 2 or not. So this cannot be applied in the where. It must be in having. Okay, and having, I will see this count greater than 2 or not. Okay, so in many cases, we can have this one, the same thing. So maybe you just not this. We'll say for each department, average salary is more than 300K. Then you do what? So you can do that also, not necessarily on count. So many cases you have the having, you have the aggregation function show up in the select also, but that is not required. So in many you depend this how you do this all depends on the question, right? So if they don't want to see how many, right? So they say the number of employees. So if they don't want to see how many, get rid of this. Then you don't need this. Okay, so it is correct. You have nothing about counting in the select, but you have something in the habit. Okay. So that's for having. This particular one doesn't have where, doesn't have group by, but you can have them also. Okay, so now we're going to do some exercise on this, but before we do that, let me do a summary here. So this is the 6 SQL clauses we learned so far. So we have 6, and select from, they are required. So you have to have a select and from in any query. The only exception is when you use this in specific DBMS system, for example, in Oracle, you can say select something from due, and the due is actually not a real table. It's just to bypass this. And in MySQL, you can do a select statement without a from. When you move on to, for example, 174, it's just because MySQL actually use select as a print statement in procedures and the functions. So it doesn't have a separate print package, it's just using select to do that. But in our 134 course, since we just learned the core material of the 6 clauses, you always need to have select and from. Remember, you need to tell the query processor which table the data is coming from. So that's why you always need to have select and from. And the rest of them, they are optional. So that means if you feel you have something to answer the question need where, you put it in. If not, just get rid of this. But if you put things in, you must put them in this particular order. In other words, you cannot say select from, order by, and where. You cannot do that. They must be in this order. When we have having, you must have group by right before that. Okay. So once we have the result, you can also use the order by, like the previous example I have, like this. This is actually already ordered, right, for the DNO. In many cases, when you use group by, they already ordered, but it's not a guarantee on things like the way you like. So you still can use group by afterwards to make sure they order the result according to the way you want to see. So that's the 6 clauses. So we'll do the more things about group and having next class.